October 17th, 2020. Should I buy a property to build equity or stay renting a room or apartment? This is a 39.6 Facebook and YouTube live finance show. This is a show that teaches high earners like yourselves how to make your money work for you, so you don't have to work for your money. We talk general investing, taxes, real estate, syndications, Airbnb, paying for college, childcare, even the car you drive. Today we take a question from the Facebook community from an internal medicine hospitalist in Northern California. This question is in the Facebook group, 39.6 community. If you'd like your questions answered, please join our group and ask them over there. I tried to get to all of them. There have been a lot of questions recently, so I'm building up a queue, but I'll try to get to everything in one way or another. Okay. So I'm going to read out this whole question. It's a long one, and I'm going to kind of break it up and answer it a little at a time. So she says, I need some help with some math. I own a primary residence in City A. This is in Northern California, where she used to live and where her daughter currently lives. Her daughter is a freshman in college in that city or nearby, and she's holding onto that house where her daughter is staying. However, for the past 2 years, she has been working as a hospitalist approximately 1.5 hours away. And so she commutes back to her original home on her weeks off. Okay, so I'm assuming she probably works like 7 days on, 7 days off, something like that, like a lot of hospitals do. And she also spends some nights and weeks in the rental room there. I'm not sure if she means in the her original house or on the new apartment, but I think she means in her original home. Okay. Since her daughter started college and her daughter's probably away from home more, she is spending more time, the person asking is spending more time in the other city where she works. And so she's needing to decide if it makes financial sense to buy a house for herself in City B, where she works, to start, quote, building equity, or to just continue renting a room or apartment, which she is okay with either way, and use the money to invest in rental properties in other states since she is in California where the market is not landlord friendly. If I buy a home in the city where I work, City B, I'm considering renting out one room of that house and also renting out one room in her original home to her daughter's friend. Okay. And I guess that's the room where this person stays when she goes home for the weeks off. So how do you calculate if buying a second home in City B where she works is a good idea? She currently pays $750 a month in total renting a room, but that $750 is all inclusive, including utilities. An apartment rent or house mortgage would have a higher monthly payment, which she can find out, but also would have higher costs from utilities, and owning would also have property tax, home insurance, and also, of course, repairs for the home, in addition to closing costs and down payment needed upfront. Are there any calculators to use? How to check how much utilities would be? Houses here are $400,000 to $500,000, and apartment rent is $1,100 to $1,200. Will getting a mortgage for a second home for the second person for the same person result in a higher interest rate, and how to avoid it? Okay, so this is a very long question. I'm going to break it down. Some of the easy things I'll just knock off. First of all, she currently has one home with a mortgage. She's considering buying a second home. Would this result in a higher interest rate? So this original home she's owned for well over a year, and that mortgage is already, I'm assuming there's a mortgage, already is in place, and it's probably over a year old. Okay, getting a second mortgage for a new homestead, you would still potentially consider this a homestead because you would be living in it now, because you would not necessarily be spending more time at your original city, because the purpose is that you're going to spend more time here. So this would be your new primary home. So just as if you are moving to another state, for example, you would be able to buy a new mortgage, a new house with a new mortgage your other mortgage should not impact your rate unless the debt to income ratio puts you in a different category in terms of how good of a or how qualified you are to rent. Okay, but a lot of people own a first home and a second home, and you can certainly do that. And currently rates are super cheap. So you wouldn't necessarily pay a higher rate unless, of course, you just don't qualify based on your income and the two different mortgages. I do want to point out that mortgage interest is capped between your primary and second home at a total of $750,000 based on new mortgages over the past 2 years since the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. I believe that's when it came in, or $1 million if you bought before that. So it's very possible that between a new house and your old house, maybe it would be $750 or less, and you should be fine. If one house was bought before and one would be bought after, I honestly don't know which rule applies, the $750,000 limit or the $1 million limit in terms of the mortgage interest deductibility. So it is something to look out for. However, the glaring thing in the entire question is houses are $400,000 to $500,000 and apartment rent is $1,100 to $1,200. That is an incredible difference in cost. So if we're going to compare apples to apples, I would want to know how much it would cost to rent out that house, not necessarily to rent out an apartment, because now we have two different things. But let's pretend that the rent of the house, the same exact house you could get for $400,000, would rent for $1,100. Well, renting is super, 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 super cheap. I mean, the 1% rule, which is 1% of the house cost should be your monthly rent. 1% of $400,000 would be $4,000 of rent. Now, even if renting that house would be, let's say, $2,000 instead of $1,100, $2,000 doesn't even, that just meets like the 0.5% rule. So that is still very expensive to buy in comparison to the rent. So the rent to buy ratio here is highly unfavorable, okay, in this location. Like, you have to think about this first as an external investor. If somebody did not live there, and a lot of people have a lot of bias to where they live because they believe in the area and it appreciates so highly until it doesn't. Would an external investor go ahead and buy this property as an investment property? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't necessarily go into it saying, oh, I'm going to buy this as an investment, because it just doesn't work as an investment. Okay, so based on what I'm hearing here, and I don't know exactly what the comparable cost of renting this particular house would be, renting makes so much sense, assuming you're going to take that extra cash and invest it, right? I mean, you can live where you want to live and invest where the numbers make sense, but you don't need to try to fit a square into a circle hole, and it just won't work, right? Now, living in a room for $750 a month, and now it sounds like you might not be staying there all the time. You might have 1 week on, 1 week off, so it might be half the month, but regardless, 30 days of staying in a place, and this is in Northern California, $25 a day, that seems super cheap over there. If you can keep your living expenses, shelter and utilities under $1,000 a month, that is crazy, crazy cheap. I mean, as a percentage of your income, that should be minuscule, right? That's $750 a month times 12 months. That's $7,500 plus 15. That's $9,000 a year. So if you make, let's say, $200,000, that's not even 5% of your income is going to housing. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're building equity or not. Building equity is something that perpetuates the whole myth that you need to own a home to achieve the American dream, whatever that really is. What you need to do is you need to build wealth, right? And your housing is an expense. Putting a roof over your head and paying for air conditioning and heat and water, those are life expenses. They are necessary things. But the cheaper that is for you, the more money you have to invest where you can make money. So in this particular situation, the optimal strategy to me is definitely to rent And even for most people, I mean, if you can keep your cost of living as low as possible by renting, because it forces you to spend less money, because you don't buy into that myth that you're getting anything out of it, because it is an expense. Buy as cheap as you can. I mean, it's like, how much would you pay for a car? Would you want to buy a car with the thought that maybe if you buy just the right car, it could go up in value? Like, it's a car, it's going to depreciate, and properties depreciate. It's the land that appreciates, right? And so you get into talking about repairs and maintenance. Those are a lot of costs, right? $750 a month to not have to worry about having to repair a roof, an HVAC system, anything, and not having to deal with any headaches. Now, especially if you go out of town, let's say 1/3 of the time, you don't want to have to be chained to your place to fix things or have to deal with repairs, right? So that takes a lot of liability off your plate so that you can just invest your capital. And a lot of the wealthiest people I know don't own their own home, because owning a home is a time sink, it's a stress sink, and it's a money sink. And you quote unquote build equity, which is what? You're paying down principal, which, okay, you're paying down principal. If you are renting, you're not paying down principal. And if you're renting, you're not paying property tax, but you're paying somebody's paying the property tax, and it's coming off of your rent, right? The one thing you don't get is you don't get to capture the appreciation. Okay, the idea of building equity by paying down principal makes no sense to me, because you could just take that cash and just invest it, whatever that principal payment is. The one thing you don't get is the ability to capture the upside of ownership, right? The equity. But if you can take that money and invest in a place that makes sense as an investment, where you are investing in a landlord-friendly place, where your risk of that money, losing money, is a lot lower, where you can cash flow on that money so you can generate income, that makes a lot of sense. Now, people say, well, it's going to appreciate a lot. Okay, appreciation is speculation. Okay, end of story. If you want to get something that appreciates, you can also find something that cash flows, or maybe buy something that's just crazy cheap, right? Buy something like undervalued. Find something that's a good buy on the buy. If you're just hoping for it to go up, and then you're paying transaction costs on both the front end and the sale, it's really hard to have a good risk-adjusted return just banking on appreciation. Now, if you're buying something that's like a fixer-upper and you can force appreciation, that's different. But when you're just buying something retail and planning to sell something retail, that's just speculation. And in the meantime, you're sinking a lot of costs into holding on to this asset, taking money out of your pocket. Okay, now, regarding the house that you're holding on to, now, I do question why that house is being held on to. Because if you're considering spending more time in the new city and that you don't really necessarily need this house for yourself to stay in, it's really just for your daughter. Now, your daughter is one person and may get a roommate potentially, and you're living in a room that you're renting from somebody else. So to me, there's an imbalance. The person who's making, I'm assuming, hundreds of thousands of dollars is spending $750 a month to live, and the person who's generating basically zero cash flow because she is in school, and so basically negative cash flow, is living somewhere that's likely costing a lot more. Now, I don't know how much it costs. I'm making an assumption that it costs more than $750 a month. It has at least 2 bedrooms. But to me, that's a money sink. Now, again, shelter is shelter, and it's an expense. So do you really need to hold on to that? Can you still provide shelter to your daughter because you want to provide that to her, which I understand because she's in college and she's your child and you want to support her? Could you support her without necessarily holding on to that property? How much has that property appreciated? Okay, that property is still a liability on your books. You still have to deal with all the repairs and maintenance that go along with it. And I don't know if your daughter's taking care of the house because she's in college and maybe she doesn't want to deal with the house. I don't know. Now, if you were to rent out that property, another room, now, does that make sense as an investment? Or would it make more sense if you sold that house took that cash and bought a rental property where you could have renters where the numbers might be better. I have no idea how much that one room would be rented for at your old home. I mean, is it going to rent for like $1,000 a month? $1,500 a month? I don't know. But you have to always step back from things that you own, okay, which is very hard because we have emotional attachments to our own property. But think about it from the other side as an outsider. Would you buy that property with the sole intent of renting it out to two people? One where that's your old room, and one which potentially could be another student, whether it's your daughter or not. Does that make sense? Does that property work as a rental property? Maybe that property is so cheap to hold on to that it's a lot cheaper than paying rent where she's in college. I don't know. But usually there's still other comparable places. Maybe it has a bunch of gains. You don't want to deal with capital gains. That might be another reason to hold it. But first you need to look at it completely externally. As a third party would look at this property as an investment. And then the other intangibles would have to come into play in your decision making. Okay, like long-term capital gains and how you would deal with that. But what if you were to consider that to be a rental property now? Make it a rental by not living it there anymore. Okay, and charge your daughter rent, and she could pay you rent. And now it becomes a rental property. And then now you can potentially sell it in a year, and you could do a 1031 exchange. Okay, but if you've lived in it for the past 2 years, or at least 2 out of the past 5 years, but let's say the last 2 years as your primary home, then you could get at least $250,000 of capital gains tax-free. Or if you are married, then it'd be $500,000. That exclusion is awesome. But a lot of these properties have gained a ton of value, and maybe your capital gains is well in excess of those exclusion limits, $250,000 or $500,000. But if you could potentially sell the property and be under that capital gains exclusion limit, take all that capital gains tax-free while you have the chance, and then invest it where it makes sense as a rental somewhere else, then, financially that might be the most desirable thing, is to continue renting a room or an apartment, keeping your expenses low, liquidating your old place, and then paying for a cheaper place for your daughter to live, taking the capital and then investing it somewhere else that will cash flow and have appreciation. That sounds to me financially the most optimal. But for a lot of reasons, I know people want to hold on to properties, and those other things need to be taken into consideration in making your choice. But from a purely numbers and financial perspective, that is how I do look at it. All right. I think that covers everything in that question. I know a lot of people have similar situations when it comes to your own property or buying another property and then trying to make it a business, etc. None of this, again, is legal, financial, accounting, professional, any other advice whatsoever. And please always consult with any other professionals, legal professionals or otherwise, financial professionals, when making your own decisions. It's strictly for my entertainment, hopefully yours. Until tomorrow for episode number 105. I believe I will be having the one, the only Dr. Kathy Carroll, CFA. Join me tomorrow evening. Planning on doing it at around 9:30 Central Time, I think. Yes. Okay. Until then, have a great day, everybody.